Oh, it's the faraway Nisha. I'm just going to say it. This new t-shirt's sick.
Oh, I wish I could see it.
Yeah. Too bad there's a disease ravaging the world. Wear a mask, folks. Few actors have had a career comeback as lucrative or as impressive as that of Robert Downey Jr., an actor who went from having a section of his Wikipedia page literally subtitled Career Troubles to being the face of a multi-billion-dollar media juggernaut. Something Robert Downey Jr. credits, in part, to a really shitty burger.
So there might be some people out there who don't know who Robert Downey Jr. is.
Well, they probably know who Robert Downey Jr. is. They probably just don't know about his earlier career, which allows me to reference one of my favourite things about Robert Downey Jr. And I'm not sure if it's still true, but it was for a while. And it was that Robert Downey Jr.'s Twitter bio just said, "You know who I am." Like Joe, when like Infinity War and stuff's coming out, it's like if you click his Twitter, like you know who he is. But the same cannot be said for Robert Downey Jr. earlier in his career because, he had this really nasty habit of doing a lot of drugs and then being arrested for doing a lot of drugs. And this led to Robert Downey Jr. becoming something of a joke in Hollywood, to the point even The Simpsons took a jab at him in the episode starring Mel Gibson that hasn't aged poorly in the slightest.
Look, they're making a movie. Robert Downey Jr. is shooting it out with the police. I don't see any cameras.
They're there with Mel Gibson. It's like, wow, Mel Gibson, what a great guy. He never does anything wrong. He's never going to fucking kill his career by doing something stupid. And they drive past like Robert Downey Jr. having a shootout with the police. And the joke is, there are no cameras.
Yeah.
Because Robert Downey Jr. was like, just a huge fuck up at the time. And now Robert Downey Jr. is Iron Man. He is the face of the highest grossing series of movies in human history, and Mel Gibson is appearing in Daddy's Home 2.
So yeah, I was going to say, I can't remember the last thing I saw Mel Gibson in.
Daddy's Home 2.
I knew him like more when he was like starring like Chicken Run and...
Oh, he is in Chicken Run, isn't he?
What Women
Oh,
Want.
God, Mel Gibson.
Yeah, voices Rocky.
And then he just went on that weird rant about the Jews when he was drunk. It's like, what are you doing, Mel Gibson? What are you doing? You're an idiot. Fuck you, Mel Gibson. Robert Downey Jr. is way cooler than you anyway.
So obviously him doing drugs and getting arrested was not good for him.
No.
So how did he get past that?
He just went to rehab a lot. And Robert Downey Jr. has been remarkably open about his past and the troubles that he experienced in it. And you know what? Well done him. But one of the most intriguing things he credits to him becoming sober is Burger King.
That's really random. So how did Burger King save his career?
Well, in 2003, Robert Downey Jr., according to him, was driving across the United States in a car with a trunk full of drugs. And while he was coming down from a hangover that will put a bear on its arse, he went into a Burger King and ordered a cheeseburger. And he sat down, got his meal, and took a bite out of the cheeseburger. And the cheeseburger was so disgusted, it made him rethink his entire life up to that point. And that sounds stupid, but you know what? I've been there, as evidenced by one of my favourite photos of me, which is me in a Burger King, hungover as fuck in Germany. When I had been out on a 3-day drinking binge, and I am sat there with a Burger King in my hand, which I should point out is my second Burger King of the morning, just going, yeah. So
Second one of the morning?
My
Fucking
second one
hell.
of the morning. So I realised, you know what? My life's pretty great right now. So I had the exact opposite experience to Robert Downey Jr., but I do empathise with him a little of just like sitting in a Burger King going, what is my life? Before we move on, Nisha, what's your favourite example in media of just the sad meal?
Oh, there's that one in Brooklyn Nine-Nine, I think it is, where he's just crying. He's
Where
crying
Jake's
over
just
his
sat,
meal.
he's sat in a hot tub eating a wet burrito.
No. Don't eat the burrito.
The example in my head, and oddly enough, it stars Mel Gibson, and it is the film Signs. And it is that scene where he makes the meal for his kids to try and distract them from the fact the world is fucking going to shit and no one wants to eat anything. And he just starts shoving every piece of food into his mouth while holding back tears.
Since you're all not going to eat, I'm going to try some of everything.
And he's just like, it's really good. It's like, oh no, Mel Gibson. Why did it? Then I realised, yeah, fuck you, Mel Gibson, I don't care.
That just reminded me of that scene in War of the Worlds where they've escaped I think it's to the mum's house, and the house is empty. And like the kids are panicking, so the dad's trying to comfort them, trying to make them some food. So he starts getting out some bread and some peanut butter and says, "I'll make you a sandwich." And then the daughter's like, "I'm allergic to peanut butter." And he ends up throwing the sandwich onto the window and it just sticks.
Okay, it's fine.
So bringing it back to Robert Downey Jr., what happened with this revolution after eating this really shitty burger?
The revelatory burger caused Robert Downey Jr., in his own words, to drive to a nearby beach where he buried his drugs or threw them in the ocean, depending on which version of the quote you're inclined to believe. And he saw that moment as just his journey to becoming sober. And something I need to point out is that other lesser fact-based websites and channels like to frame this story as Robert Downey Jr. hating Burger King, and that couldn't be further from the truth. Like, he really likes Burger King. It's like, when you need a burger, why not go to Burger King? And the reason that he was so disgusted by the burger is not because it tasted bad, it's because he was just so high on drugs and so hungover. And the revelation wasn't that the burger tastes so shit, it's that he couldn't enjoy something as simple as a cheeseburger. And that's what made him realise, maybe there's something wrong in my life.
Yeah.
When he could just sit there eating a cheeseburger, it's like, I'm not even enjoying this. Like, this is one of life's most basic pleasures, of just eating fast food, eating something you're not supposed to eat, but you just need that little bit of fat, that little bit of sugar, and like, I'm not enjoying it. Something has clearly gone wrong. Something needs to change, and it's clearly me, not the burger. That's one of the reasons why Burger King has a cameo of sorts in the first Iron Man movie. Because if people remember that movie, they'll know that the very first thing that Iron Man, Tony Stark, asks for after being freed from the cave is he wants an American cheeseburger, and they bring him a Burger King.
Look at you. A burger, you had to have a burger. Yeah?
Well, come on.
You get me one of those?
There's only one left. I need it.
And Robert Downey Jr. reportedly specifically requested that they give him Burger King for that scene, as Iron Man was going through a similarly pivotal moment in his life, and he wanted to just make a subtle, or not so subtle, depending on how big the branding on the bag was, reference to that happening in his own life.
That's cool. It's like, I obviously didn't know this fact, so now when I see that scene, I'll be like, oh yeah. I'll think of it differently.
It is a bit strange, isn't it, that the very first thing Tony Stark asked for, I want an American cheeseburger, and they bring in Burger King and say, oh, that's really hammy, bad product placement. It's like, no, Robert Downey Jr. had a similar epiphany while eating a Burger King, and that's the moment where he eats the burger and says, Stark Industries no longer makes weapons, I'm changing my life. And people out there might be wondering, have Burger King ever said anything about this story? And the answer to that is they haven't publicly, but privately they have given Robert Downey Jr. something known as a crown card, which is something only handed to a select few people who are considered friends of the Burger King brand, which apparently includes Robert Downey Jr. And said card entitles Robert Downey Jr. to unlimited free food from Burger King worldwide for the rest of his life.
Then again, with him being a celebrity, doesn't he get a lot of free food anyway?
Yeah, pretty much, but at least it's the thought that counts, isn't it? So I don't think it's a controversial statement, far away, Nisha, to say that Robert Downey Jr.'s casting as Tony Stark / Iron Man was fucking perfect.
Yeah, he makes probably the best Iron Man I could think of, really.
I can imagine nobody else in the role, to the point where there are actual interviews where people call Robert Downey Jr. Tony Stark. One of the reasons I think his casting is so good is because people may not know, in the comic books, Iron Man struggles with alcoholism, so he has a similar struggle with addiction that Robert Downey Jr. has also experienced, but the reason I want to mention it is because there's one comic universe where Iron Man isn't addicted to alcohol, he's addicted to food. So Iron Man just gets really fat. And the Iron Man suit doesn't fit anymore.
Oh my god.
And it's really bad to laugh.
Oh, that's great.
The idea though that he gets so fat his Iron Man suit doesn't fit him. He's like, oh no, what am I doing with my life? Yeah, like that alcoholism arc in the comics is like something Tony Stark constantly struggles with. And it's led to some of the best pieces of art and the worst pieces of art. Because the very famous one, I think it's Demon in a Bottle on the cover, in which he's just like this really haggard Iron Man staring into a mirror with 5 o'clock shadow, just screaming at himself, and it's great. And you get glimpses of that with Tony Stark. Sorry, not Tony Stark, fucking Robert Downey Jr. I'm doing it now. in the movies. Like when he gets drunk and he's in the Iron Man suit, he's just firing lasers at his wall.
And if anybody, Pepper, doesn't like it, there's the door.
And then you have the thing where he has flashbacks to when he went through the wormhole in Avengers, and he's like constantly dealing with these like panic attacks, and he has to go inside the armor to feel okay. Like, he doesn't feel safe outside of the armor. It's like, yeah, that's really good. Like, yeah, there's like Tony Stark is a character who struggles a lot.
Yeah.
And it's great that we've got an actor who, understands those struggles and at the same time has overcome them and gone on to great success.